Speaker today. So George Cederquist. There we go. The audio is started. Our speaker is George Cederquist. He is the chair of the theater department here at North Park. He supports the vision of North Park Theater as a training ground for artists moving into Chicago's storefront scene by teaching conceptualization, storytelling, design, acting, and improvisation. He works to integrate the departments of theater and opera, a pairing often overlooked by other academic institutions, both in the classroom and in live performance. He is a member of the Steep Theater Company and the artistic director of Chicago Fringe Opera. He also hosts Opera Box Score, America's talk radio show about opera. His training includes residencies with Pittsburgh Opera, the Marola Opera Program, and Wolf Trap Opera. He holds an MFA in directing from Northwestern University and a BA in theater studies and English from Yale University. He is a member of the American Guild of Music Artists. So, welcome, George. Thank you so much for joining us today, and I'm going to pass it over to you.
Thanks, Anthony. Thanks, Jasana, for having me. I was going to say on the show. I'm so used to the podcasting world where it's always a show. These headphones, these are like old school, like listening, learning library headphones. It's great to see you wherever you are today. I'm here in rainy Chicago. You might be somewhere else, but thanks for spending your my lunch hour at least. I don't know again what time zone you're in, but thanks for spending the time. And as Anthony said, definitely want to. I'll make sure to leave some time for questions at the end. But I wanted to talk a little bit about my background, a little bit more, sort of how I got to North Park, what I do here, what I do outside of there. To talk a little bit about the intersection of two huge passions in my life, which are sports and opera. Listen to a little bit of an audio clip, and then we'll get to any questions that you may have. And again, that chat always available. I do have an eye on chat, so feel free to put everything in there. And actually, I think we'll start with a quick little poll. If you do have chat available, and if you do have an answer, I would love to know if you're a sports fan. What's your team? What's your team that you are a sports fan of? You can just put it in the chat. And Bears and Cubs. There we go. Fantastic. I'm going to add to the chat as well. With the Michigan Wolverines. Again, and you might not be a huge sports fan, but if you are, you can go ahead and put that in the chat, and let's see what other fans we have out there. The Cubs and the Raiders. Yes. The LA Raiders, the Oakland Raiders, Vegas Raiders. There we go. Jasana, I know that's you. Western Michigan University hockey, Detroit Lions. I love my college hockey as well. All right. So here's the second question for chat. Here we go. Oakland, but now Vegas. Yeah, thanks, Alan. Here's the second question for the chat. If you have seen an opera, and if you can remember what that opera was, go ahead and put that in the chat as well. Maybe you've never seen an opera, in which case that's cool. You can just say, I've never seen an opera. Or if you've seen tons and tons of operas, you might just think about what's the last opera that you've seen. And I need to remember what the last opera I've seen as well that I wasn't a part of. Let's see here. I'll put that in the chat as well. The last opera I saw. Favorite Slabo. Yep, that's a great Puccini. That's a great opera. Let's see here. I'm going to put mine in the chat as well. Last opera I saw was an opera called Moby Dick, based on the Herman Melville novel. Music by Jake Heggie, libretto by Gene Shear, and that was at the Metropolitan Opera back in over spring break. Our family, we went out to New York. Took the kids to New York for the first time. And last opera I saw was The Consul. Excellent. Giancarlo Menotti. That's also a great classic opera. That helps me kind of know who's out there listening. Again, Anthony did the introduction. Just to say, so I started teaching at North Park in 2015 when I was brought on just to teach the occasional class in the opera wing of the music department. And right around the time of the pandemic, I was elevated to then run the opera program, and shortly thereafter, to guide the theater major, which became a minor, to guide the theater minor kind of into its next phase. And so now I'm the theater department chair and then also run the opera wing of the music department. And as Anthony said in the introduction, these are two disciplines which at most schools, pick your favorite Big Ten university. These are programs which typically don't talk to each other, don't play nicely in the sandbox with each other. And one of my, dreams, one of my pieces of work at North Park is figuring out how those two things can support one another. It helps that they're sort of, living in one student body and one director like myself. So there's overlap there, theater and opera. Another overlap for me, and this is the bulk of our time together, is about sports and opera. I am a huge opera fan. I started off as a theater director, and although I had a very musical childhood, started as an actor and then added in directing as well, and directed plays for years and years. And it was probably only maybe 20 years ago that I actually started directing operas when I was in graduate school, maybe 15 years ago. And I've always been fascinated by the complexity of opera. But as a sports fan, my second love, I've always been interested in what are the areas of overlap between opera and theater and between sports. And I want to just talk a little bit about what are some of those moments of overlap and try and get us kind of thinking collectively about that these two art forms, and I do think sports is an art form, what their overlap is. I'll talk a little bit as well about a podcast that I'm now the executive producer of. It's a podcast called Opera Box Score. You can find it on the web, operaboxscore.com. We're going to listen to a clip from the latest show from Opera Box Score as well. And that podcast does what I'm about to talk about in detail, which is it talks about the overlap between sports and opera. A little bit more about the podcast later on. Let's talk about kind of like what makes theater theater. And for me, when you boil it down, theater is really nothing more than something that is worth watching. And something that is worth watching live, in person, and in real time. And that description, something that's worth watching live and in person in real time, could apply to theater, as I just described, but I think it could also apply to sports. And on that principle, I want to kind of drill down into some areas where there's quite a bit of overlap between these two art forms, right? So opera obviously is a live art form that has drama as part of it, that includes theatrical design, scenic design, costume design, and lighting design, and becomes something that's worth watching. It's a spectacle, right? Opera, Alan mentioned La Boheme, I mentioned the production at the Met. I mean, these are, by and large, spectacles. I would argue that sports, more and more, is becoming about entertainment and is becoming about spectacle and drama. If you can think about a recent sporting event, maybe we've even been to, so much of sports now is about the fan experience. I'm going to talk about fans in a minute. I remember taking my family to watch a game at the Chicago Wolves, which is Chicagoland's minor league hockey team. And you got to get there early because there is this elaborate pyrotechnics display which they do as the players skate onto the ice. And this is indoors, of course, right? Anthony, Wolves fan over there. It is so family friendly, it is so entertaining, and it is truly spectacular. So here you have these two art forms, and again, sports as an art form, where they're both concerned with spectacle and that which is worth watching. When I teach my students here at North Park, I say to my opera students that you are three things in one person. You are a musician because you have to sing. You have to reveal through singing. You reveal something so personal about yourself. Anybody can talk, but when you start singing, there's nothing to hide behind. And so, as musicians, that's the first thing that you are. Secondly, as an opera singer, you're an actor, right? You are creating character, you are telling a story, you are part of a narrative. But the third thing that I talk about with my students is that I think they're athletes, especially in opera. When you really work at this profession, and the amount of extraordinary breath control, stamina, and physical strength it requires to be an opera singer, it's kind of overwhelming. It's one of the reasons that like I mean I do sing, but I'm certainly not an opera singer. It is so demanding on the human body. Obviously, we can agree that sports takes physical fitness, training, endurance. I mean, these are fundamental things to being a sports player. And so both these fields, opera and sports, require a great deal of athleticism and are very physically demanding on the people that take part in them. I talked about fans earlier, and I think this is where the idea for the podcast, Opera Box Score, came from, is that I wanted to do a podcast that was about opera, but that it was in the form of a sports talk radio show to try and highlight the similarities between sports and opera. And we're going to listen to a clip in a little bit that we were talking about opera as the content, but the form was sports talk radio with all of the fourth grade humor, with all of the interviews, with all of the hot takes, just like anything you would listen to on ESPN 1000 here in Chicago or WSCR. You would get this like kind of rough and ready take and opinions on something that we typically think of as rather delicate and refined, which is opera. And one similarity there between these two fields is the fans. If you've ever listened to a sports talk radio show, very often they take live callers, right? So this is like Jerry from Arlington Heights who calls in and talks about the Bears and why like their quarterback Caleb Williams has to go, and he lists all these stats and statistics. Typically most of the callers on sports talk radio are men. And classically, most callers will be like, and I'm gonna hang up and listen, and then the hosts will take apart their argument or agree with their argument, whatever. But what you have, obviously, is that sports are largely driven by their fans, people who are fanatical. I'm sure everybody on our call today can think of somebody in their lives who like wears the Cubs gear inappropriately to the very formal event, and they're like, "What? I'm a Cubs fan. I'm gonna, I know it's a wedding, but I'm gonna wear my Cubs like jacket anyway." These are fans who have grown up knowing the names of the players, who have grown up going to the games, who have grown up buying the merchandise. And I would argue that opera has a similarly devoted following, because it's a rather specific thing in our American culture, less so in Europe, but in our American culture, opera is, I do believe, seen as a rather unique and unusual thing. Perhaps going to see a play less so, perhaps going to see a musical less so, but opera, right, for a number of reasons is seen as a kind of a unique thing. Typically, mostly because it's in a foreign language. That can be a barrier to some folks, typically because it's done in very large spaces. If you can picture the Metropolitan Opera, Lyric Opera of Chicago, insert your opera house here. But the fanaticism of opera fans, I don't think can be underestimated. Fans who are subscribers to the opera house, that is to say, season ticket holders. Fans who know the names of all the singers. They will know names like Pavarotti, or Freni or Callas, right? These are some of the more famous opera singers, say, from the 50s through the 90s. But even today, If you dare to go on any sort of message board or social media platform about opera, you will find absolutely fanatical people who know all the names of the singers, have tons of opinions through social media, are happy to share those opinions, love tracking careers of singers over time, and end up with this very loyal, very opinionated fan base. I talked a little bit about how, for me, opera and sports have this commonality of being something which is quite simply worth watching. Operas are obviously stories told through music and set to music, oftentimes with big, high stakes themes: love, betrayal, death. And in my opinion, I feel like sports is perhaps the last place in our culture where we truly don't know what's going to happen, right? Obviously, in film and television, those have been filmed and edited, and so the end is quite literally known. It may not be revealed. Even on a reality TV show, right? The ending may not necessarily be known, but we know that there is going to be an ending. We know that one of the last three people there on Great British Bake Off, we know that one of them's going to win, even if we don't know who. And we know that the producers of the TV show do know because they've edited the whole thing. In my opinion, sports, however, we truly don't know what's going to happen. We don't know what the final score is going to be. We don't know what the final plays are going to be. We don't know how this is going to end up. And that is the beauty of sports, I think, in our culture, is it's one of the last places we can go to really exist kind of in the present moment. If we were to rewind a little bit and look at opera in a larger historical context and historical setting, obviously opera is one of the older art forms in our country. Opera started in around 1600. We can kind of debate when, but in Italy, it wasn't then Italy. Italy had not been unified at that point, of course, in 1600. But Monteverdi's opera Orfeo, based on the Orpheus myth, is sort of seen as like the first opera. And 400 years later, these operas are still being performed, right? Shakespeare would kind of be the other equivalent, I suppose. And I think sports is similar. I think sports is very deeply embedded in our culture. We talk about baseball as America's pastime. We talk about baseball as something which every one of us, if we have the interest, should be able to go see. Even Major League Baseball in 2025 has figured out that it can't price out any one fan on any day, and anybody with a few bucks in their pocket is able to go and see a baseball game. That's how kind of ubiquitous, that's how central baseball is to our culture. And I think opera is, in this country, it's getting there. Certainly in Europe, where I lived in Germany for a couple years, and you do see opera very deeply embedded in that culture. Obviously, it's been around longer in that culture. And it is more part of that social fabric. But these are both forms of entertainment, opera and sports, that are deeply embedded in our cultural identity and history. And frankly, even to sort of tied to national identity, right? Like, if I gave you the prompt Italy, you might think of like Tuscany or pizza or, I don't know, a Lamborghini. And you might also think of opera, right? That's opera, sort of a synonym for that country and that culture. Similarly, if I gave the prompt like Brazil, you might think about Carnival, the rainforest, and you might think about soccer. You might think about Pele. You might think about the beautiful game. You might think about Brazil's dominance, World Cup after World Cup. And so these two forms can also be very deeply embedded in the national identity of the countries that they're a part of. both opera and sports rely on ticket sales. This, I think, is perhaps where things start to deviate a little bit. Opera in this country typically is performed at institutions that are not for profit, and so that largely run on grants at the city, state, and federal level. Broadway musical theater is an exception, right? Broadway is run, those are commercial ventures which are run by investors and backers who expect a return on investment, although it's virtually impossible to make any money off of a Broadway show. Your pro tip is you're way better off playing the stock market if you want to make any money than investing in a Broadway show. Hamilton aside. Hamilton's the exception to the rule. Sports, of course, are huge money-making endeavors. I think the NFL, I forget if it's tens of billions of dollars or hundreds of billions of dollars that the NFL generates now. And the amount of money that sports generates for local economies is enormous. I would argue that opera does the same thing, probably off by an order of magnitude or two, but is certainly something which has economic connections to the community that is part of. Sports and opera take place in unique venues. I mentioned the Lyric Opera of Chicago before, and if you are here in Chicago, maybe you've been there. If you're really into opera like I am, you've got your bucket list of opera houses that you want to go to. I would think of La Scala, which is the opera house in Milan, Italy. The Metropolitan Opera, I mentioned that earlier. That's where I saw a show earlier this year. The Royal Opera House, which is in central London. And these are, or La Fenice, which is the opera house in Venice, which is burnt down and been rebuilt multiple times. The Palais Garnier, which is, or the Paris Opera in Paris. And these are iconic venues where when you go, obviously you're there to go see, let's say, La Boheme, but you're also there to say, I was in that lobby. I was at the Bavarian State Opera in Munich. I was in that lobby. I was getting my glass of champagne at that bar. I saw this brilliant show. I was in the square afterwards outside. And for me, there's essentially no difference between those iconic opera houses and the iconic sports stadiums that we have in this country and in other countries around the world, right? So Wrigley Field, for example, Madison Square Garden, where the New York Knicks play basketball and the New York Rangers play hockey. Wembley Stadium in London, which hosts rugby, soccer. Actually, it hosts live rock shows, and there's a lot of live music which is now being done at Wembley as well. But you have baseball fans who will make lifetime pilgrimages to say, I want to go see a baseball game in every single baseball stadium in this country, which sounds amazing. I don't have the time or the money to do that, but what a great road trip that would be. Most beautifully, because of course the beauty of baseball is that although the distance between the bases and the bases and home plate is all the same in every Major League Baseball park, the outfield dimensions are park by park, and there's a variance in what those dimensions are, right? So like Wrigley Field has different outfield dimensions than, say, Fenway Park in Boston. That's the beauty of baseball, right? That's the beauty of baseball's age, is that it comes from a time where these things were not standardized. And the beauty of having asymmetry in a major league sport. To connect it back to North Park and the training of opera singers, which is one of my responsibilities, again, the training of sports players, I think, is very similar. Opera has its music conservatories and its music academies, which are there to help develop the next range of stars. Similarly, where you have youth academies and the college system in sports, which tries to feed its players into the pros. In addition to that, I think having been working in higher education now for 10 years, and also realizing how difficult it is to make that transition from an undergraduate program or from a graduate program or a doctorate program into the professional world, I found that to be very similar to students who might play football at a place like, say, Michigan at one of the highest college levels and then not go pro. It's just it's so competitive. But that training process is, I think, largely the same between the two forms. I grew up in Ann Arbor, Michigan, so I had to put down in the chat that the Wolverines were one of my big teams that I support. More and more, we're finding that opera is coming into the home through television and streaming. This approach really very specifically began in 2008 at the Metropolitan Opera in New York City when they launched a program called the Met in HD. And you may have perhaps been to a Met in HD broadcast. So this is when you buy a ticket, go to the movie theater, and you are watching in real time a live simulcast from the Metropolitan Opera into that movie theater. It's a total blast, not least because you get to watch opera on a big screen with really great sound. And because it's live, you get all of the quirks and you get all of the little things that remind us that opera is this living, breathing art form, that it's not perfect. I think this is probably why I don't tend to watch a lot of movies or TV, because I find it to be so curated and so perfect. I'm not quite sure as an audience member what my role is. Versus if I'm attending an opera performance live, if I'm attending a sports event live, I know that what I do actually does impact the results of the experience. If I'm in the audience at an opera and I clap or I boo, that does affect the performance of those artists. Similarly, if I'm at a Bears game and I'm cheering on third down, when the Bears are on defense and I force the opposition into an incomplete pass and force them to a fourth down and have to punt, I know that I've actually had an impact on the game. So you have opera now coming into movie theaters, and of course, it was just a little jump from that in 2008 to 2020 in the pandemic, where opera companies who had the financial wherewithal, who had the infrastructure, were able to start to stream archival performances that they had captured over the years. And some of these were very new. Some of these were performances. You could watch performances from opera houses all over the world that maybe had been captured in the last year or two, but they were also able to release and stream performances, say from like the 70s or 80s, things which I certainly had never seen live and maybe only seen photographs of. I think it's pretty obvious what sports impact is on television. I mean, the TV rights are huge for sports events. We have so many channels now dedicated to broadcasting sports. Obviously, we have sports bars. And when I win the lottery, I'm going to open up not a sports bar, but an opera bar, which is going to be a sports bar, but it's going to just screen live opera productions. But you can still eat like a burger and waffle fries as you watch the latest thing from the Metropolitan Opera. That's a lot of talking from me. I'd love to introduce you to just through a clip from the podcast that I'm part of. Again, it's called Opera Box Score, operaboxscore.com on the website. This is a podcast that started over 10 years ago. I think this is our 12th season now. We call ourselves America's Talk Radio Show about opera. And you heard me earlier on the call sort of describe this as sports talk radio about opera. One of the segments that we do on the show is called the 2-minute drill, which is a sports term in football where there's 2 minutes left on the clock and you're hustling and you're trying to score a field goal or a touchdown in those 2 minutes. What we do on our show with the 2-minute drill is we rattle through that week's opera headlines, and then our team dissects them and gives their hot takes and their opinions on those headlines. So I'm going to play you a clip from this week's episode. Our show comes out on Thursday, so a new episode is going to drop tomorrow, 6 a.m. Central. And we might listen to 5 or 7 minutes of this. So sit back, relax, and enjoy. I'll be here. I'll come in at a suitable point, but this is going to be longer than 30 seconds. This will give you a bit of time to kind of listen to some of this week's headlines, how we talk about it, and let you enjoy this. So let's see here. We should be able to see last week's episode, which is called The Stuff of Legend, with Joshua Collier, who was our guest on the show last week. And let me see here. Let's get the sound going, and you'll let me know if you can't hear.
Drill is right now.
This just in. The 2-minute drill.
All right, listen up. Here's everything you need to know about what happened in Operaland this week.
Last month, Zachary Wolfe officially became the obituaries editor at the New York Times after being removed as the paper's classical music critic earlier this year. Last month, Jesse Green, former head theater critic, was appointed cultural correspondent for the Times, a position which will include classical music reporting and criticism. As of the time of recording, the positions for full-time classical music critic, pop music critic, and television critic are still listed as available on the paper's website.
Base Pata Borhuladze was arrested by the Ministry of Internal Affairs of Georgia, the country, following a political protest in Tbilisi. Berukhalze has become a prominent political figure in Georgia and was a member of the October 4th protest organizing committee opposing the interim government. He has been charged with, quote, calling for the violent overthrow of Georgia's constitutional order and participating in group violence. Fellow Georgian Anita Rashvelishvili expressed support for the singer, saying, quote, he is fighting for our country. We love you, maestro, and we are all with you.
The South Bank Center in the United Kingdom is partnering with TikTok to launch Crescendo, a new initiative to raise the platform of digital classical music creators, as the classical music hashtag on TikTok has seen a 60% increase in use over the last year. Quote, bridging the worlds of classical music and digital storytelling has shown me how powerful platforms like TikTok can be in connecting new audiences with the art form, said Crescendo panelist and violinist Esther Abrami. Crescendo is an opportunity to give artists, creators, and musicians greater access to the arts.
20-year-old opera singer in training, Megan Hastings, says she got into opera in part because of a reduction of symptoms in her Tourette's syndrome. Discovering singing has offered relief from painful tics she has experienced for the past 10 years. Quote, when I'm singing, you wouldn't think I had it, said Hastings. It's freeing to be able to sing through songs and being in rehearsals, being comfortable and not in pain all the time.
Last season, the Turkish State Opera and Ballet drew record crowds for the second year in a row, reflecting the company's commitment to putting on festivals in underserved parts of the country, rather than limiting itself to large urban areas. Opera and ballet have achieved great milestones, said General and Artistic Director Tan Sayturk. The more we collaborate with local talents, introduce them to conservatories, and share our art with them, even in earthquake-affected regions, the public will see that our work is more than just entertainment.
The label and classical music specialist organization Naxos has been bought out by Cuke Music Holdings Limited for a controlling share of 70.43%. The $106 million purchase is despite a lawsuit 1 year ago that alleged that Cuke actually owed Naxos $1.8 million in unpaid fees. Quote, this strategic acquisition will significantly enhance our position as a leading classical music services platform, said Cuke chairman and CEO Pei Shan-tan. Naxos' world-class content library, combined with its proven global distribution capabilities, creates compelling synergies with our existing music education and technology platforms.
If you're in New York City and a fan of Giuseppe Verdi, and why wouldn't you be, I have some great news for you. Participants at a public celebration on Broadway and 73rd Street on October 10th, mark your calendars, will be invited to sing Va Pensiero, the chorus of the Hebrew slaves, in front of 27 red roses, which will be placed in honor of Verdi's 26 operas and the Requiem.
Finalists have been announced for the 2025 Gramophone Awards, which include multiple friends of the show. Amanda Forsyth, for her album of Telemann arias, is going up against the debut solo album of Oliver's parallel universe husband, Hugh Montague Rendell. The third nominee in that category is Lucretia, Portraits of a Woman, featuring Sandrine Piau, Lucille Richardot, and other not-yet friends of the show. In the opera category, The Flying Dutchman, featuring Gerald Finley and another friend of the show, Lisa Davidson, is competing with Opera Rara's original 1857 version of Simone Boccanegra, and Michael Tippett's, only in England, New Year. In the song category, friend of the show, Julien Pregardien's Schöne Malerin vies for the prize against tenors Nikki Spence in Fauré songs and Robin Trichler in Songs for Peter Pears. May the best friend of the show win.
And one more major award. Avant-garde composer and performer Meredith Monk will receive the Golden Lion for Lifetime Achievement at the Venice Biennale Musica.
In trade news, Garsington Opera has announced that Ben Weston, no relation, will be the company's new executive director starting this November. Weston, again no relation, will take over from Nikki Creed, who has served in the position since 2013. Farther east, Polish Royal Opera has appointed conductor Marta Kluczynska to the position of deputy general manager. Finally, in the USA, New Rochelle Opera has appointed Jason Tram, once again no relation, comedy comes in threes, as its new general and artistic director.
On the disabled list, Julia Bullock has withdrawn from Magic Flute at the Royal Ballet and Opera following recurring symptoms for an undiagnosed condition. I've made the decision to go back home and try to get to the root cause of the problem, said the soprano on Instagram. Lucy Crowe will fill in for the role of Pamina.
And on this day, October 6th, in 1600, it was the first performance of Jacopo Peri's opera Eurydice in Florence, Italy. In 1722, Johann Fuchs's Le Nozze di Aurora, not to be confused with that other Nozze, had its premiere in Vienna. 1851 saw the first performance of Francisco Barbieri's Zarzuela, Jugar con Fuego, in Madrid. In 1853 was the first performance of Adolphe Adam's Les Bijoux Perdus in Paris. In 1868, Offenbach had a premiere, his La Pericole, in Paris. In 1892, Alberto Franchetti's Cristoforo Colombo in Genoa. And in 1996, there was the first performance of Zemlinsky's opera Der König Kandaules, which was a posthumous performance at the Staatsoper in Hamburg.
Some birthdays today as well. In 1820, it was the birth of Swedish soprano Jenny Lind, the Swedish nightingale, who was not a beltress for Hugh Jackman, but we do what we can do. Italian tenor Giuseppe Anselmi was born in Catania in 1876. Polish composer Karol Szymanowski was born in 1882 in Ukraine. And in 1887, it was the birth of Moravian-born American soprano Maria Yaritza in Brno, which at that time was part of the Austrian Empire.
And that's your 2-minute drill.
Fantastic. That's more opera information in one 6-minute block than you could process in a single week. Let's jump ahead. We're going to listen to a very short minute or two of the team responding in their hot takes.
Like, yeah, I was cast as the prima donna in the prima donna role. You know what I mean? By Strauss, no less.
He knew his way around a soprano.
That is for sure. And, you know, it's someone else who presumably knows his way around sopranos, and indeed a lot of classical music, is Zachary Wolfe. And unfortunately, his career is, I won't say dead, but certainly the obituary section feels mean.
It honestly feels like HR was like, how can we get him to resign? We're just speculating here. We have no insight into the staffing decisions of the New York Times. But Zachary Wolfe still is a critic who knows his way around opera,
yes.
and writes very, very well about the voice. And I'm still disappointed that we won't get to read his work in that section anymore. Yeah, I mean, yeah. Hopefully this is not the end of his musical criticism career, and that we will get to continue to read more reviews and write-ups that are not just about famous opera singers as they pass away. But
Yeah.
what do you think this means for music criticism, not just at the Times, but like in the U.S.?
I mean, it is a big question. I think that, I mean, we talked about this a little bit once we heard that Zachary Wolf was getting, moved. And at the time, they were promising that they would be hiring someone else in his position. And indeed, as of our recording date right now, that does seem to still be up, that they are searching for a classical music critic, and, all the other, what was the pop music critic, the TV critic, they're all still open. So theoretically, they could still hire them, but it's been a little while.
And
That's crazy. Zachary Wolf, who's the music critic for the New York Times, is no longer doing that. Now he's been moved over to obituaries. Wow. That's my takeaway from this week. I cannot believe that has happened. Of course, it happened at the Tribune, where Michael Phillips, who was the film critic, he's been gotten rid of, and now the Times gets rid of their classical music critic. The show is near and dear to my heart. It's been going 12 years. OperaBoxScore.com is where you can find it. And for me, it synthesizes everything that I know and love about these two art forms of opera and theater. I know we're winding down here a little bit on the time, and so I do want to turn it over to any of you. Again, thanks so much for coming and hanging out. If you have any questions or have any comments, again, feel free to put those in the chat. That's probably the easiest way to do that, I think. And as you're coming up with those, I'm going to give you two invitations for the future as you come up with any questions that you might have about these art forms of opera and sports. First of all, is that one of the other projects that I'm part of outside of campus is a small opera company here in Chicago called Chicago Fringe Opera. We produce 21st century operas that are composed in English at various venues throughout Chicago. And our fall show is this Friday, October 17th. It's at the Carine Center for the Arts, which is at basically Central Avenue and I-290, so just east of Oak Park. And it's a triple bill of 3 short operas written all by female composers and librettists on 3 very different topics. You can find out more about that at chicagofringeopera.com. Again, any thoughts or questions that you have, feel free to put those in the chat. Lastly, my other question or plea to you would be next time you're looking for a good present for somebody, or next time say a young adult comes to you and wants to do something, invite them to the opera, whether that's Lyric Opera of Chicago or Chicago Opera Theater, or even us, small opera company Chicago Fringe Opera, taking folks to the opera, whether they are old or young, but especially if they are in college or high schoolers or teens. That is the best way to make sure that this art form continues. And of course, you can take them to a baseball game as well.
Did anyone have any questions they want to jump in with here? Well, we want to... Sorry, go ahead.
Hello. Yeah. Thank you so much, George, for very, very deep and interesting topic. The way how you just blended these two topics as a sport and opera, because for me it was just might be related to performance. That's one of the area which is kind of combines both of them. But from you today, I have learned that's the art. You can get fans, and that's the also kind of competitive areas as well in both areas. And 100%, it was very interesting topic to bring it, because I was very deeply curious, like, what is the George going to say about these two things, could because like for common person, I would think like, oh, they're not kind of like a related, but they actually very deeply related through art and performance, and even from the physical, physiological stand of the point. Yeah, thank you so much for bringing such a very deeply interesting topic in the way how you blend it. Yeah, and I love your passion. Thank you.
Thank you so much for coming, and let me take that comment and wrap it in with Alan's comment on the chat. Alan says, "Does North Park do any operas?" And what the answer is yes. So what we are always trying to do here is to do the unique and the unusual. And so we do a live musical performance every year. Typically, we alternate back and forth between doing a legit musical and a legit opera, and we'll do a musical or opera in the fall, and then on a small scale, and then we'll do a musical or an opera in the spring on a large scale. So if we took a look at last season, say last fall, we did in the fall on a small scale, we did Mozart's opera La Clemenza di Tito, The Clemency of Titus, which is the last opera that Mozart wrote, and that was with students. In the spring of last year, so the spring of last school year, 2025, calendar year, spring 2025, we did a world premiere opera called Murder on the Titanic, which is actually by a Danish composer, which was a U.S. premiere. And Matthias Vestergaard was the composer of that. And actually, through the Danish consulate, he was able to come to North Park and be in residence with us and our students for a week. This current academic year that we're in, we have a rather unique crossover for our spring production. And so this show is going to go up at the end of April. You do not want to miss it. And that piece is kind of one of the most perfect overlaps between opera and musical theater. It's a rock opera. Jesus Christ Superstar is the show. It might be a show that you've heard of. The music is by Andrew Lloyd Webber, with lyrics by Tim Rice. It's been done a lot recently in the Chicagoland area. I think we might be the third production of this academic year that is doing Jesus Christ Superstar, and that will be in April of this year as our show.
Wonderful. And Murder on the Titanic starred a member of our department. Jusana was in that performance. So yeah, thank you, George, so much for joining us today, for talking with us. You can